Good morning, everybody. I think right now we're going to be listening to Senator Waters on SB 264. Welcome, Senator. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 264. This bill deals with the low-income programs, and just a little bit of background. We created the low-income program under restructuring in 1996 and a variety of following legislation after that, and it established the low-income program and helps people basically pay their bills, and it has an accumulation up to $1 million that is in that fund, and I will say this has been a very successful program over the last 20 years, and this bill does not change the funding whatsoever, but it is a bill that results from the establishment of the Department of Energy and the ongoing effort to kind of sort out what should be administered in the PUC and what should be administered in the Department of Energy. And it seemed to make eminent sense that this would be one that should be administered by the Department of Energy. And also, you know, we've learned over the last couple of years that it's awfully good idea to have legislative intent and to ensure the stability of a program by having it fleshed out in statute. So I think we've learned that lesson in some other areas, and this would be a good one as well to do that. Do you have an amendment before you?
Yep.
And this was worked out with consumer advocate Crease and David Shulock. I want to thank David Shulock in particular for his work here, and you know, the amendment before you has been fully vetted by the Department of Energy, so it is good to go in terms of their looking at what Senate Bill 264 might do. And also there's been input from Ray Burke of NHLA, and he, I'm sure, will have some things to say about it as well. What the amendment does is it clarifies the procedures here for administration of the fund, and particularly says that what the department may do is modifications, not elimination of the program. There's some anxieties about that. I mean, there's some anxieties about whether the PUC would do that, and that's one of the reasons for the bill. But this says now in the amendment that modification of any such program can be undertaken by the department, but that there needs to be an adjudicative process. And here provides a public process and ensures that people who are interested in the program have an opportunity during the process of this administration to have their voices heard and to work with the department on that. And that explains a lot of what you see in lines 20 to 24, and that in some ways is kind of the part of the heart of it, as well as up above in lines 12 to 13 to clarify that. So to keep it short, this is a good program, very successful, helps low-income folks, and this stabilizes it and clarifies the procedures by having the administration of the program and the fund transferred over to the Department of Energy. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator, for your testimony, for bringing the bill forward. Senator Gray, do you have a question? Okay. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I saw you reach for your mic. I figured, okay.
Getting prepared.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Don Crease, would you like to testify?
I believe that I would, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Avard, members of the committee. As you all know, my name is Donald Crease. I'm the consumer advocate tasked by statute with representing the interests of residential utility customers, including low-income customers at the PUC and everywhere else on the planet. Senator Waters was kind enough to introduce this bill at my request. I made that request because I was concerned about the future of the Electric Assistance Program, which is, as you already know, assistance for poor people having trouble paying their electric bills. Note that I said poor people on purpose. I don't mind referring to low-income customers as a means of preserving the dignity of those who might qualify for help with their electric bills. But euphemisms aside, we are talking here about poverty and the need to reduce it. In particular, the topic at hand is the crushing energy burden many poor people confront. According to Vital Communities, a nonprofit that serves the Upper Valley, the average energy burden in New Hampshire is 9.4% of annual income. In Coos County, it goes up to 14.3%. That's more than $5,700 a year. This bill has one simple purpose. It takes the Electric Assistance Program out from under the Public Utilities Commission and its oversight and switches that responsibility over to the Department of Energy. Why do that? Well, I have two reasons. The first reason is good government. About 8 months ago, as you know, we shrunk the PUC and focused it on what that agency does best: adjudicate contested cases that principally involve utility rates. And we created a Department of Energy to take charge of the policy questions, including the administration of various energy-related programs. The PUC has lots of good people, but they are now firmly behind an ex parte wall, and thus they are not well suited to running or even determining the parameters of a program like the EAP. Second, we have a problem. It's called the System Benefits Charge, SBC. You created the SBC in 1996, back when I was in junior high school, as a part of the Restructuring Act, essentially to do two things: fund energy efficiency programs and fund the Electric Assistance Program. The PUC has made perfectly clear that it doesn't care for either of these programs. I don't need to remind you that last November the PUC decided to gut the SBC-funded energy efficiency programs, a policy blunder and practical fiasco that the General Court has had to fix via House Bill 549, which is now law. Less well known is PUC docket number DE 21133. The PUC opened that proceeding last summer when, as usual, the utilities and the community action agencies that help the utilities with the EAP proposed their budgets for the year beginning on October 1st, 2021. And note, that's the beginning of the cold weather season. Even though the Department of Energy supported these budgets in writing, as did the EAP Advisory Board, the PUC refused to endorse them. Instead, one day before the program year was to begin, with winter looming, the PUC said it would implement the budget for October and November, but then it would hold a hearing to consider the future. Then fast forward to November 30th, when the PUC issued another order, this time saying it was commencing a full-blown contested administrative proceeding. All of this, mind you, in circumstances where every single interested party, including the Department of Energy, as presumably the representative of the governor, was just asking for budget approval. We requested a pre-hearing conference so that we could figure out what the heck the PUC expected us to do at that hearing. That happened finally on January 27th, on the morning after the coldest night of the winter, at which point we shamed the PUC into approving the EAP budget for the remainder of the program year. But at the same time, the PUC put out a series of questions that gave every indication that it would bring to this part of the SBC the same hostile attitude with which it reacted to the other part of the SBC, energy efficiency. Bear in mind that the portion of the SBC devoted to the Electric Assistance Program has been set by statute since the dawn of restructuring in 1996, never adjusted for inflation, by the way, at a maximum of 1.5 mils per kilowatt hour. A mil, of course, is a tenth of a cent. So this is not a rate proceeding. Now, I've grown a little too accustomed lately to picking on the PUC, so let me show my former employer a little love. All the PUC is really trying to do here is its job, thoroughly, and is to ratepayer money meticulously. I think the PUC really does want to do the right thing, but in these circumstances, it's simply not set up to do that. It's no more qualified, that is, to micromanage the Electric Assistance Program than is my office. And a formal adjudicative process is no way to run a program like this, which really requires a combination of administrative acumen and policy insight. That's exactly what we created the Department of Energy to do. The PUC's job by statute is to be the arbiter between shareholder interests and ratepayer interests. But when you're talking about SBC-funded programs like the EAP, The shareholders just aren't involved. This is strictly ratepayer helping ratepayer. In other words, we're talking about energy justice, an emerging and pressing topic. Professor Shalonda Baker, a professor of law, public policy, and urban affairs at Northeastern University, published a book recently in which she said, and I quote, "No single aspect of the energy system writ large has been designed to benefit poor people, people of color, or indigenous communities. So, this professor contends, equity must be a central part of energy policy, and that requires, quote, a constant calibration of social, economic, and the environmental harms through the policymaking lens." Now, I'm not asking you to accept that proposition, only to acknowledge that policy calls like that are for you to make in the first instance as the General Court, and for the Department of Energy as an executive branch agency to make in the second instance. Some might suggest that at least when the PUC makes a decision, interested persons enjoy a right to formal adjudication. I disagree. Yes, Section 4 of the Restructuring Act says any administrative or adjudicative proceeding or public hearing relating to the Restructuring Act shall be subject to the provisions of the Administrative Procedure Act. But the Administrative Procedure Act itself acknowledges that not every administrative determination requires formal adjudication. In docket DE 21133, the PUC has made clear it intends to put those who care about the Electric Assistance Program, and by extension those who depend on it, through a kind of trial by ordeal. This is unnecessary, it's unhelpful, and if it results in the EAP being gutted the way energy efficiency was kicked to the ground last November, it will be wildly unpopular. The cure is Senate Bill 264, and so I respectfully request that you report the bill as amended to the Senate floor with an ought to pass recommendation. Thanks for considering my views, and of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions. In fact, I'm hoping you have some questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Please, somebody. No. Thank you very much, Don. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, I do have a written edition of what I just said in case anybody cares to like re-experience it, so I'll just hand that.
All right, Ray Burke. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Raymond Burke. I'm an attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance. We are a nonprofit law firm that represents low-income Granite Staters throughout the state in civil legal matters, and we have an energy and utility justice project where we represent individuals and organizations before the Public Utility Commission with respect to issues affecting low-income ratepayers and customers. And NHLA has been actively involved in the Electric Assistance Program since its inception. It was way before my time, but we were involved in the low-income working group that studied the issue and made recommendations about the type of program to create and how it should be run. And NHLA has stayed active in all the PUC dockets that have since modified the program, as well as participated actively in the Electric Assistance Program Advisory Board. So we, at the outset, I just want to say, echo Senator Waters' word of thanks to the consumer advocate and the Department of Energy, and I would add Senator Waters to talk through some of the issues. We had some concerns about the initial version of the bill, and we think this amendment is a step in the right direction, but I think we need a little bit more time before we can say that we fully support it, and I'd like to just walk through what our concerns were. And so, as Senator Waters said in his testimony, the Electric Assistance Program has been a very successful program over the last 20 years. In 2018, the Regulatory Assistance Project touted it as a model program for the region and perhaps nationally. And so when we look at this bill and what it would do, and want to acknowledge that the consumer advocate's a tough act to follow, so we very much appreciate his leadership on low-income issues, but I think we have maybe some minor disagreements about some of this. When we look at the Electric Assistance Program, we ask, why has it been so successful over the past 20 years? And for us, a large part of that has been the fact that there has been an open, public, and transparent process. The Public Utility Commission dockets are publicly available. Everything that's posted there, at least in going back several years, but even the early decisions from the 2000s are still available and can be read. There was meaningful stakeholder input through those dockets and through participation in the public meetings held by the Electric Assistance Advisory Board. And so we want to just make sure that any change we're making here would preserve what has allowed that program to respond to the needs of low-income ratepayers over the years and become what's been touted as a national model. And so our starting point for an agency administering a program like this, we have another project, our public benefits project, that does advocacy around other low-income programs such as Medicaid, SNAP, cash assistance. And when we looked at how those programs are administered, it's primarily through rulemaking. Now, this amendment doesn't prohibit rulemaking, but it also doesn't require rulemaking. And so what we're trying to think through is the language that Senator Waters pointed you to, roughly, from 20 to line 20 to 24, is that sufficient process for allowing for meaningful stakeholder input into the program, as has been the case for the last 20 years. And so we just have a couple of, would like a little more time to think about that. My hope was to have a final decision for you this morning. Unfortunately, I don't have that on behalf of the of New Hampshire Legal Assistance, but it's possible even by the end of today, we may have a more firm position on whether that language addresses our concerns. One other thing I can note that we're trying to think through is there are some other references in the RSA to the program and the fund, and we're just trying to make sure that this language works in conjunction with those other statutes. And so if we have a concern, we can certainly try to raise that. And as I said, I could try to do that as early as by the end of today. I just unfortunately don't have a solid answer for you this morning.
All right, questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again, Ray. I think it's been a really good process of conversation and work with David Shulock, and a kind of hurry up too, because there've been a lot of versions of this going back and forth, as you know, and so I appreciate your insights, and I hope we are executing for the next couple of days. So I'll leave it up to the chairman as far as that goes, how much more time we might have. But let me just get back to, I think, what the issues were in the testimony today, and then our conversations. That isn't it the case we're trying to balance out the the benefits of some of the process of the PUC with the risk under 21-133 and other things, that the risk to the program itself, and that's kind of the nub of it.
Yes, I think that's right, and I think this gets into what I alluded to earlier about maybe perhaps some minor disagreements or different views than the consumer advocate. That while we certainly understand the concerns that he expressed around that docket, and especially after what we saw in the EERS docket, but I think that docket has only just started. It's relatively new commissioners who are still learning about the program. As he said, I agree. I think the commission's trying to do its job. I think that there are some legitimate questions being raised in that docket. So we do not think that what's happened in that docket is necessarily, in trying to balance what you just said, in trying to balance the risk. We're not sure that that docket is necessarily reason to do this just yet. But that being said, we are sympathetic to the point that was made that we're under a new paradigm with the creation of the Department of Energy, and so perhaps in that new paradigm, it is more appropriate for the Electric Assistance Program to be with the department. I think where we struggle is there's a tension there, because there are still aspects of the SBC that are going to be left with the PUC, notably energy efficiency. And so while this isn't rate making per se, as the consumer advocate pointed out, traditionally, authority over the SPC has been with the PUC. It will still retain some authority over the energy efficiency programs. And so I guess we're still struggling with what's the appropriate place for each program and what's the, and I will admit, our Energy and Utility Justice Project does not do as much work as the consumer advocate does before the PUC. So in general, we like to defer to his opinions on these matters, but those are the questions that we're asking.
If I may just
Yes,
follow up.
follow.
And, just in terms of the issue of rulemaking, I think it is fair to say that this doesn't exclude that the bill is silent on the board, and so that would continue. But that, the issue for the rulemaking, I mean, it could happen, but the issue for putting it in here wasn't it that, it might take a year, and the Department of Energy did not think that it would have the personnel to do it, so that's why we ended up with the adjudicative process, and so.
Yeah, no, I think we are certainly sympathetic to the practical limitations of rulemaking in the short term, and I think we had some thoughts on how to address that with different language. I think there would be nothing that would need to require rulemaking immediately, but I think our initial perspective and opinion was that rather than a non-adjudicative notice and comment period, that should the department wish to make any changes in the future, that rulemaking would be in a more appropriate process. So could administer the program in the short term, could approve budgets, could even address the EAP fund as needed, but that if we were modifying the program design in some significant way, in terms of who's eligible for the program, et cetera, that rulemaking for us is, and again, that's we look to other programs that we're involved in. That's just tradition. That's how agencies generally act with respect to these types of programs.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Senator Perkins Coker.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. And I think you're raising some good questions, and I appreciate the spirit in which they're being raised. I guess in listening to you, I mean, one of the questions I would have is sort of the mechanism for how, this overage would be adjusted, for example, that's contemplated in the amendment. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but, perhaps talking through just sort of like, would you see there being a problem with sort of how, giving the department the authority to suspend by order of the collection or some of all of this portion of the benefits? Or are you, and again, I'm just trying to understand where your concerns might lie, are you more concerned with if we were to, for example, change the eligibility criteria for the program?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I think I probably maybe confused things in my word choice earlier. I would say it's the latter. So I pointed to lines 20 to 24, but really I should have pointed to lines 12 through 14, I believe. It's really the modification of the program. I think we are less concerned about the department's oversight of the administrative budgets that are approved, have traditionally been approved annually, and even oversight of the EAP fund, which the department already has some authority over the EAP fund under RSA 6:12-B. That's one of the other statutory provisions we're looking at to try to make sure there's no tension between what that says and what this says. So in that sense, the department already has some level of authority and input over the fund, and that is not as, I think, our main concern. It's more how will the program be, the rules be modified going forward. And traditionally that's been handled in the PUC dockets. So dockets like 21-133, even though that started as a docket around the administrative budgets, it's now turned into a docket over potentially program design. And so I think you're right, that's really what our biggest concern is.
So we have we're going to be execing tomorrow as well. So you'll have,
Yeah, my hope is that by the end of the day, I can let you know whether we fully support this. I think I'm cautiously optimistic again, this was definitely a helpful change from the initial version. So I'm hopeful that by the end of today, we can have some answers to some of those remaining questions we're trying to think through, and then I can let the committee know. Hopefully, I'll let you know one way or the other, but hopefully it will be we fully support it, or we still have some concerns and cannot at this time.
further questions? Seeing none? Thank you very much. Don,
Thank-
do you want to respond at all?
To say that we've had some really interesting and productive conversations amongst Senator Waters, Mr. Burke, and me over the last week or 10 days or so, and the Department of Energy has been involved, and the amendment that Senator Waters is introducing is an attempt to address those concerns, and I think we've succeeded. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm at odds with with New Hampshire Legal Assistance and its Energy Justice Program. That program has been around for a really long time, as Mr. Burke said, and I really do respect and generally want to defer to their views. And if ultimately the way they come out is, well, this bill does more harm than good, given the way it's currently worded, then I would indeed agree with ITLing the bill. And if so, I really do think this is a good government initiative, and I would likely be back with it in the future, because I really do think the logical and natural home for this program is in the Department of Energy, because I think that the Department of Energy will respond to public and political pressure. That's what a policy-making agency does, and I think that's the right way to make sure that the public and the legislature gets the electric assistance program it expects. So thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none? Anybody else? All right, we're going to close the hearing on this. Do I have a motion to move into exec?
So moved.
And all in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. I want to take up SB 271, seeing how we have Senator Bradley here. Senator Bradley, you want to talk a little bit about your amendment?
How'd you like that, Jeb? You come through the door and everything stops.
SB 271, Senator Bradley, you're introducing 09876, 0986S.
That's correct.
All right.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We've worked quite a bit on an amendment to try to resolve some of the outstanding issues in the bill. The amendment that you see before you, I think what it tries to do is go back to the original intent of the bill that I filed in 2018 to provide Burgess financial relief for a finite period of time. And it seeks to send that message to the PUC that the financial cliff that came out of the settlement that Burgess really had no choice but to accept if they were going to continue in operation is what is potentially triggering a shutdown of the plant, given the financial cliff. So if I could walk through the amendment with you. As I said, when I introduced this bill a while ago, Burgess at 75 megawatts is critical to the energy security of New England. If anything, energy security is even more heightened today than it was a month ago, in particular for something that we already have the fuel, biomass. And it's, as I indicated before, it's 24/7 baseload power. Baseload power is at a premium right now, and I think, as I testified before, the operator of the grid is pretty concerned about loss of any baseload power. So on lines 13 and 14, it sends a clear message to the PUC that It's intended to protect the continued viability of Burgess for a 3-year suspension of the cap, the cumulative reduction factor. It also goes on to say that the intent of Senate Bill 577, which I sponsored, was not implemented correctly, and that's where Burgess was sort of between a rock and a hard place, that they had to accept it. One of the things that Eversource came to me about, and you'll see it starting on line 27, that any cost to their should be recoverable by Eversource. So that's where the language on line 29 talks about a non-bypassable surcharge. And then again, it goes on, just as it does in the purpose statement, to talk about grid reliability and energy security at the top of page 2. On line 8, talks about the federal power issues, that it doesn't influence any wholesale bidding behavior. And then lastly, the last important point is on line 17, an expedited review. So it's my hope that the committee can pass this bill, and the full Senate will pass this bill, and hopefully we can keep the 75 megawatts online. So that's my ask this morning.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee?
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. Nice to see you. I was wondering, on page 1 of your amendment, line 25, reads the Public Utilities Commission shall amend any of its orders as necessary. I just wondered if we have a separation of powers problem with that. I mean, I know we can obviously create legislative intent, and that should be clear to the PUC, but I just didn't know if you had explored that legally.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's fine.
Right off the top of my head, I can't give you an example of an instance where the legislature has said to the Public Utilities Commission, you will do this and you will do that, but I know it's happened in the past. So I'm trying to recall, for instance, the divestiture docket, maybe 10 years ago, when I think we laid out pretty clearly how that was to happen. So I don't think this is precedent setting in that regard.
Okay. Thanks, David.
Follow-up? No. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Senator. And, you know, I know there's probably some concern, and I don't know if you can stay for just a minute to hear from the consumer advocate about the effects of having the past 3 years of withheld funds now put out on the rate payers. And so anyways, he'll talk about that and some other things, I'm sure. But in terms of the part on page 2, lines 11 to 15, I don't know if you're aware of the fact that the breakdown of the infrastructure funding that is coming includes this grant area of energy improvement in rural remote areas, providing $1 billion to entities in rural remote areas under 10,000 inhabitants. That's good for Berlin and other places, to increase environmental protection for the impact of energy use and improve resilience, reliability, safety, and availability of energy. And those funds will be available in 2022. So would there be a way in this bill to kind of tag the time frame in which the burden of the last 3 years is placed on ratepayers over a little time, so that it's possible that 2022, you know, fall money would kick in and mean that we would not have to put that on the ratepayers?
I mean, obviously, that's what Roman 3 on page 2 is intended to allow use of any funds that get appropriated federally for this purpose. As you know, those funds, some of them come with state, and we're going through a process where they go before the fiscal committee, and the fiscal committee approves or changes or doesn't approve them. But the infrastructure dollars, as I understand it, are much more spelled out. So I think it would depend on, where and what. So this general statement allows that to happen. And I think that's probably, at this point, the way that we should go.
Yeah, thank you. I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a way on page 1, line 19, to wiggle the language, repay immediately and in full, so that if those funds come in, there's a way to make the ratepayers whole?
It certainly would not be precluded by anything that we're doing here. It wouldn't necessarily authorize it either.
Yeah, I guess what I'm just saying, if it's immediately in full, how would it be then possible to if there is some other money to, I guess
Well,
it just go into the rate, it could go into the rate base or something in a way that would over time address the money that was then.
Depending on how the federal process worked, for instance, with the broadband dollars, which have broad support in New Hampshire, the state has to present a plan to the feds on how it's going to be implemented. So, I mean, there could be that kind of mechanism in place to. I don't think we can just assign it without understanding what the parameters might be.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that conversation in the committee
Well, I think
report,
and again,
because I think that's something we could do, and it might alleviate some of the concerns.
Exactly, but nothing precludes that from happening, should that money become available. And I think, again, that's probably the best area that we can head in today.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, do you have a moment to at least hear what Don's going to be saying on this?
What's that?
Do you have a few minutes just to hear the counter? Don Crease is going to be talking a little
Well,
bit.
we're executing in commerce, so.
I guess that's a no. All right. All right, so no further questions. Thank you very much, Senator.
Okay, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Recognize Don, if you want to just have a couple of comments on that, and I noticed you had a couple of highlights on your notes.
Indeed, maybe you've been watching me scribbling in the margins while Senator Bradley was talking. Just for the record, I'm Donald Crease, the consumer advocate, again. When this bill was originally heard, I made a point of not appearing in person. I wrote the committee a letter, and I said, and I still say, that the consumer advocate is neutral on this bill. Why am I neutral? Because really, this is a public policy initiative in which you're asking the ratepayers of this state to pay for something that's really outside the parameters of what they're buying when they buy their utility service from Eversource. And public policy calls are for you to make, they're not for me to make. I take those as a given when I advocate at the PUC, and I do the best I can within the parameters set by the legislature. And it's not really for me to decide, it's for you to decide. That said, if any version of this bill were calculated to get me to move off my position of neutrality, it might well be this version of the bill. Why? Because what Senator Bradley is essentially asking you to do is to take money that was built up over the last 3 years and force the Eversource ratepayers to pay for it now. Well, what's going on now? Two things. One, we are in a time of upward pressure on energy costs, and that upward pressure is being felt today by ratepayers, especially residential ratepayers. Meanwhile, that same upward pressure has been seen in the wholesale electricity market, so that we've seen some prices. My phone is programmed to ping me every time the locational marginal price of electricity in New Hampshire goes above $200 here in New Hampshire. And that ping happens all the time. It's been happening at night over the last few weeks. And guess what? Burgess Biopower is part of that wholesale market. So those lucrative wholesale prices inure to the benefit of Burgess as a generator participating in the wholesale market. So really, it's almost like it's a double whammy solving this problem or addressing this problem in this fashion, because the plant up in Berlin gets the benefit of those good wholesale prices, and they also get the benefit of ratepayers now being told to pay back money that accumulated over the last 3 years. I was really glad to hear Senator Perkins Quokka mention separation of powers issues, because I think there are some real problems here. And now I'm really putting on my administrative law, I don't know, scholar or expert hat. The way this is supposed to work is the legislature creates the PUC, gives it instructions by way of its enabling statute, and tells it to go off and do its thing. It's just not cricket to come back 3 years later and say, well, guess what, PUC? You know, it is now going to be enshrined in statute that you got it wrong 3 years ago. P.S. The PUC did not get it wrong. They got it right. That was, in fact, the PUC correctly, in my view, interpreted the statute that it was told to implement 3 years ago. And I would point out that if anybody was unhappy with that decision because they believed that the PUC misinterpreted the statute, the right place to go with that concern was the New Hampshire Supreme Court. This idea that the Burgess plant was somehow forced to accede to certain determinations made by the PUC. I just don't agree with it, with all respect to Senator Bradley, because there could have been an appeal. Essentially, what this amendment is asking you to do is to bless something that has historically been anathema in New Hampshire, and that thing is called retroactive rate making. The customers of Eversource over the last 3 years that the CRF was in effect, have already bought and paid for their electric service. And what this is now telling those customers to do, because all these funds are fully recoverable from customers, Eversource has made sure of that, you're asking customers now to pay again for service they have already received. You know, again with respect, this is in response to the question Senator Waters was asking about, could we somehow use federal funds to offset this hit that you're asking ratepayers to take? The answer to that, pursuant to the terms of this amendment, is no, because there is blanket language in the bottom quarter of the first page, from lines 22 to 31, that basically says that no matter what else happens, that money that's been building up in the cumulative reduction factor fund is going to be imposed on ratepayers through a non-bypassable charge, and that money is credited to the facility up in Berlin. So, you know, again, I am neutral. Really, this is a public policy call for you to make. But as between the previous version of the bill and this version of the bill, I guess I have a strong preference for the previous version of the bill because of its because it really addresses this problem in a going forward basis, not on a retrospective basis. I apologize that that's not a very elegantly worded set of reactions, but I just found out about this morning and sort of talking extemporaneously, I guess would be the word. Happy to answer any questions if that would be useful.
Yeah, if we actually lost the bio plants up north, what would that do to the ratepayers?
Well, you know,
That's 75 megawatts, right?
From my perspective, we operate in a regional context with respect to what New Hampshire ratepayers pay for their electricity. We're not talking about distribution or transmission costs here. We're talking about energy costs, and the energy costs that people pay and the reliability of the electric grid is determined on a regional basis. And so 75 megawatts that would go away, even though it is, as Senator Bradley said, essentially baseload power, I don't think that would have a big effect. It certainly wouldn't change the reliability of the electricity grid. How do I know that? Because if it were, I guarantee you that ISO New England would be here telling you that, because they are very vigilant about that problem, and it is a problem. But I don't think that the loss of that 75 megawatts is going to either make the lights go out or make wholesale prices go up.
What do you think it would do to the economy up north?
I don't really know, Senator, and frankly, that's why I consign this ultimate question to your good judgment. You know, that's really outside my bailiwick.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Senator Perkins Quokka.
Just to clarify from your perspective, Mr. Advocate, and thanks for being here. If we are able to hand this back over to the PUC, and if they follow their process, which due to timing, allows us to take advantage of federal funds to accommodate this bill. My presumption is that most of your concerns would go away because instead of retroactive rate making, we would then be using federal funds to address this problem.
Well, again, starting with line 27 of the bill, it says, any amounts that have accrued as a result of the legislature's suspension of the operation of the CRF during the 3-year period shall be recovered through a non-bypassable charge. I mean, the verb there is shall. It doesn't say, hey, PUC, if you figure out that there are other ways of helping Burgess Biopower through federal funds or some other way, you don't have to do this. You're using the verb shall here. You are instructing the PUC. You are not giving the agency any discretion. And again, I think it is a problem. If it has happened before, it was a problem then too. Writing legislation that tells the PUC that it was wrong about something is not the way our frame of government is really supposed to work. The idea is the legislature, and I've said this in other contexts, the legislature establishes guidelines and frameworks within which the PUC is supposed to exercise its delegated authority, and then you let the agency do that, and if the agency did it wrong, the aggrieved party or parties have to go to the court. That's the way this is supposed to work.
Follow up if I may, Chair. Understood on the language you're discussing, and we can talk about that as a committee, but just to point out, I mean, do lines 11 through 15 on page 2 of the amendment not alleviate some of the concern about using shall, because it says nothing in this act shall prohibit the state from using federal funds to offset any economic impact to ratepayers?
Right, the state is authorized to do that, and I suppose to the extent that would come under the jurisdiction of the PUC, I'm quite sure the PUC would be delighted to do that.
Okay.
But that
No,
doesn't,
that's important.
you're still using the word shall on line 28 of the first page of the bill.
Thank you.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, without Senator Bradley here, we're gonna have to obviously talk to him about it, but if you look to, that section, lines 21 to 26, and here's the crux of what you're talking about, retroactive action, right? So, what if we, on line 25, instead of saying shall amend any of its orders, we could say the commission shall open a docket to amend any of its orders as necessary to protect the continued operation of the Burgess Biopower plant.
If I were the PUC and I received that directive from the general court, I would consider myself all but obliged to follow the instructions on lines 27 through 31 of the first page of the bill. In other words, yes, I would open the docket. Yes, I would let the consumer advocate come and say to the PUC pretty much what I've just said to you, and then the PUC would issue an order that makes that does what line 29 references, impose a non-bypassable charge that basically allows for the recovery of those 3 years of CRF funds.
Yeah. So, thank you.
Could you repeat that?
So what I had said, was on line 25, strike the word amend. No, excuse me. On line 25, insert after the word shall, open a docket to.
Mm-hmm.
Shall open a docket to amend?
Yeah. Yep.
I still, again, the PUC will open that docket because you've told it to, and then it will, at the end of that docket, it will issue an order following the instructions in lines 27 through 31.
So this whole issue of separations of power goes away, even though we still use the word shall?
I don't think it does. The separation of powers question is kind of a law professor thing, because I don't think there's any real practical possibility that somebody would bring that question to the court and get the New Hampshire Supreme Court to opine about whether there's a separation of powers problem here. I mean, this is not the United States, this is the state of New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire Supreme Court is not the U.S. Supreme Court.
All right.
But Don, I mean, thank you, Jim. Don, I can't remember how many bills in the last few years that I have introduced and we have passed that says to the PUC, you shall open a docket. It might be on energy storage, it might be on EVs, and you shall do this. And it has an enumeration of things that you will do in that. So I just don't see it.
Well, because when, I don't have those other bills in front of me,
Yeah.
but I think those bills typically say, hey, PUC, you shall open a docket and then you shall apply this standard. You know, you may determine whether it is in the public interest to provide for utility scale battery storage or renewable natural gas or you know, whatever interesting public policy initiative the general court wants to enforce or embrace. And that, I think, sends the PUC a signal that the legislature wants you to look open-mindedly, if not favorably, on those new technologies and their potential benefits in the future. But what you're doing, what you would be doing here is something different. You would be telling the PUC, open a docket and then impose this charge. You haven't left the PUC any discretion by issuing the instructions that start on line 27 of page 1. Even though you've told it, you might tell it, open a docket to do that.
I do, yeah, I'm just, you know, we don't need to settle this now, but I do think that the bills that I passed and many others that have been passed are much more specific and actually do something very much like this. But we can figure that out in the fullness of time. But thank you.
Again, I'm neutral on the bill, so it's I leave this to your wisdom and insight.
We thank you for your neutrality. Appreciate it. And for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, Jim?
Thank you, Senator Avard. And Jim Monahan with the DuPont Group, and we work with the folks at Burgess Biomass, and have been working with Senator Bradley on the bill in the committee as well. So I don't want to have a long debate with a consumer advocate about this, but I think we're kind of in the situation, because he'll probably win, right? The longer it is, the more. But I think what we're trying to do with this amendment is resolve, as Senator Avard talked about, ensuring that the Burgess Biomass, as a matter of public policy, is able to continue to operate. And so what Senator Bradley's amendment is attempting to do is find that practical reality between the legislature making a public policy solution that needs to go through the Public Utilities Commission. So if you recall the letter from the consumer advocate at the public hearing, he expressed some gratitude that we approached him in this matter, but wasn't willing to support the bill at the time and stayed neutral. What we'd like to be able to do with the consumer advocate, the other parties here, is to try to get to yes. And I didn't hear a lot of that from the consumer advocate this morning. I'm happy with my client to work with him to get there. But we do have some practical realities. And what we're trying to address with sections of the bill is some timeliness issues. I think, as you know from the testimony that was presented, that there was a series of financial events which would cascade as a consequence of the calendar around the orders that were in place. And so what the language here is seeking to do is making sure that that process at the commission doesn't drag on for years and leave the operation of the plant at risk.
Have you considered what Senator Waters has proposed?
Yeah, I think that's very likely a reasonable approach to this, so that we deal with any perception around the separation of powers. And I must say, I mean, I'm dating myself a little bit, but worked with Senator Bradley and the PUC and the consumer advocate at the time around the divestiture issue. And that was an instance where the legislature gave a lot of direction to the Public Utilities Commission to achieve a public policy outcome. And that's all we're trying to do here, is to get that done. So, okay. And I should say, with regard to saying that I think it's very appropriate for occasionally the legislature to say the Public Utilities Commission didn't act properly or they were wrong. And I think we did it about 3 weeks ago with House Bill 549. And I kind of remember voices on behalf of ratepayers come forward and saying how awful it was, and the PUC didn't know what they were doing, and they dragged us through an awful process, and legislature, please come in and fix this. So I think that's sets a good tone for what we try to do. I don't think the specifics of the right and wrong have to overwhelm this. We're really just looking for a practical solution, and as I think everyone so far has agreed, as a matter of public policy, we're trying to ensure that we find a way for the plant to continue to operate in this legislature PUC matter. And the suggestion earlier that parties should go to court just is not a practical solution given the time frames that we're dealing with. So,
Questions from the committee at all? No? All right,
So
Senator Gray.
And this is a comment on the bill too, right? You know, back in 18, we were made certain promises, okay? And those promises, in my opinion, have not been kept. There was a problem with the law. Nobody came back in 19, nobody came back in 20, nobody came back in 21 to fix those problems with the law. Now, I've got a piece of legislation in front of me. It says, not for 3 years, it says to protect the continued operation of the Burgess Bio Plant. Okay, it doesn't say 3 years, it doesn't say, it says continued operation. Okay? Burgess has got to get on their feet so that they can support themselves. The materials that we've got out there that are fueling this plant need to be diverted to some other use and help the economy up there. I don't think that the bill as structured here in the amendment does those things that I need to vote for this again. And I had a problem voting for it 3 years ago. And I'll let you comment.
So with regard to, does it say 3 years or not, I think what we're trying to do with the language is to address the 3 years of the CRF, which was established in 2018 by Senate
CRF?
Bill. CRF, I'm sorry, yeah.
What is the CRF?
It's the
For the public to.
continued reduction factor, and this is a matter of the terms of the purchase power agreement establish a fixed rate that the company is paid for its power. That's what PSNH buys it for, or Eversource purchases it for. If any given time that cost of that power is above the market price, if they've been able to get it somewhere else, then there's an accounting for that, and that accounting is a continuing reduction factor. And so what Senate Bill 577 attempted to do was to say for a 3-year period that over-market calculation would not have to be absorbed by the plant, so the plant could get some breathing room to try to get things operating on their own feet, which is, I think, part of the observation that Senator Gray has made, that that what got done during that 3 years. And I think some events have overtaken that 3 years, and then part of the market frustration is that despite the fact that the company has tried to co-locate industrial operations, has tried to work with the city to come up with a hot water solution to heat the sidewalks and things like that. The problem with all of those investments is if there's an unknown as to whether or not the plant would operate day to day, then the ability to sell steam or heat or electricity to others is in question, and that's something that we're hoping to resolve. I think there's some other significant changes which have occurred with regard to when that mechanism was designed as well, which are out of the hands perhaps of a lot of folks here. To begin with, PSNH divested, and some of the pricing associated with the PPA were based upon what PSNH was paying for fuel at a power plant that they operated in Senator Burke and Quoker's district. And so that's changed, right? So that plant was sold, and it even doesn't operate now. So that pricing is still a legacy within this PPA, which has some disruption factor to it. The other huge issue, which is kind of a good news story, is that the price, for a long period of time, the price of electricity bottomed out. And so this concept of whether or not the PPA was over market was not contemplated at the time. Electricity would be at 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour. It was based upon it be about the 8.5 cents that we were paying. So as prices dropped, that calculation grew. And so to the lower rates, to the great benefit of the ratepayers, have taken place. And then with regard to where we're at today, I think that I'm not sure if I completely understood what the consumer advocate was saying, but when wholesale prices are high, the company doesn't get a higher rate. We get a fixed rate during the term of the PPA. So today, for example, in the last 2 months, the wholesale price of power has been much higher than what Eversource is paying under the PPA. So we don't get any benefit of higher wholesale market price. And I'm sure that wasn't an intentional mistake by the consumer advocate. It's a complex deal. So I guess what we're looking for here is the breathing room. What we're not asking for is an extension of that 3-year period to beyond that. There was some consideration of that, but I think that there's not an appetite for it. But at least to say the bargain that we thought was created by the legislature in 2018 would be fulfilled, so that the plant doesn't start off so far behind next January when this comes due that they just wouldn't be able to do it.
Do you have a follow-up, Senator Gray?
No.
Okay, Senator Perkins-Coker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jim. What's the term of the long-term PPA?
I think it was a 20-year term. There's 8 years left on it.
20-year term with 8 years left. Okay. And I'm obviously new to this debate. Am I understanding it correctly to hear that basically the bill we passed 3 years ago perhaps wasn't properly or wasn't implemented with the intent of the legislature in mind? So perhaps we're sort of in the same place, having the same conversation we were 3 years ago in a way.
Yeah, I think, in 2018, I wasn't representing the plant, but the expectation was the legislature had created this 3-year suspension of the over-market payments. But when that matter got to the Public Utilities Commission, it wasn't interpreted that way. And as I understand it, the company was in a position of they needed to move forward despite the fact that they objected to what the commission had done in that interpretation. And that's really the nature of the dispute now is, who's responsible for that 3-year period. Our view is, Senator Bradley's view is, from his amendment, is that it was the intention of the legislature not to shift that burden to the plant.
Okay, and just one more follow-up, if I may. I don't know what the price of power is under the PPA. I'm sure it's complex, but
yeah, again, because it's based upon what the price of wood at Schiller, and there's no price of wood at Schiller anymore.
Sure, but in general, right now, it sounds like the price of power from the plant, just from a basic standpoint, is lower than what the wholesale market is for power.
Today, that is the case.
Today, that is the case.
Right. Over the last several years, it's not been the case because, as you know, the price of power
has been way down.
Has bottomed out.
Yes. I'm aware from what I do for a living.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. So. Thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
Senator Gray, do you have any suggestions?
No,
as far as fixing or addressing your concerns? How do we go about getting there?
the basic concern, we all want to make sure that the North Country, has an economically viable future, okay? Certainly, we also want all of the ratepayers in New Hampshire to have energy to receive their energy efficiently and to have it at the lowest cost that is out there. And what was presented to us 3 years ago was a plan. Okay? And what happened is that what we thought was going to happen for those rates and who was going to bear the burden, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe Mr. Robridge, could weigh in on this since he was involved, I believe, in some of those discussions 3 years ago. But they interpreted it differently than what the intent of the legislature, in my opinion, was. So now, instead of coming back to us, in those years, we have kind of ignored this problem, okay? And now we've got this big mountain in front of us. And as a legislature, I'm forced to make a decision between the economy of the North Country, electric rates, which is why the governor weighed in on it 3 years ago. And I don't know that this plan is going to get me anywhere in those 3 years. And that's my dilemma.
And I certainly understand that, only to say in the defense of the company, I think when they were confronted with the situation where the Public Utilities Commission had interpreted the law differently than wanted, I think that they didn't want to rush back to the legislature and ask for a fix. Perhaps maybe that was the approach to take, but as you all recall, the political environment around biomass wasn't great. And so there was an attempt to try to resolve things from a business perspective without having to come back and ask for help. And unfortunately, that has not been successful, and that's why the company is back looking for some support from the legislature.
We are still in exec, so did you want to hear from Griffin by any chance, Senator Gray?
If he believes that he has any thing that will help him enlighten us, I certainly would appreciate it.
Can I just add, Senator, I will work with the folks at Burgess to get our arms better around this concept of if there's federal money available, how do we make sure that it steps in the first instance? It may be what Senator Bradley observed that that's already the case, but we'll take a hard look at that.
All right, so we're going to exec this tomorrow.
Okay.
Again,
And I'll take a hard look at it this afternoon.
I'll need some answers like yesterday.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Griffin, do you have anything that you'd like to point out?
If there's specific questions, otherwise I'll sit right here, if that's okay.
Anybody else?
I have a question.
I'm kidding.
I mean, it's not a hearing,
No, I know. Man.
Hi, Senator. I don't want to belabor this conversation. Again, I'm Don Crease, the consumer advocate. I just want to correct something I said earlier in light of what Jim just said. Yes, it is true that under the PPA, the Burgess plant doesn't get the benefit right now of the over market, the lucrative price of wholesale power. But I will say this. If Burgess would like to tear up its power purchase agreement, I'm pretty sure Eversource would be amenable to that. And I would be perfectly happy to see that happen as well, because that would restore the situation that the legislature intended and that the Congress intended when it restructured the electric industry, right? Like plants like Burgess Biopower were supposed to go on their own into the wholesale market and try to make money. And, efforts to kind of play with that have created constitutional problems that have come to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they have created the kind of problems you all are grappling with here. I hear Senator Gray's concern, and I agree with him that, this is a problem that could have been fixed in any number of ways sooner than it's been fixed now. So, again, I consign this to your good judgment. I really have no plea to make on behalf of the North Country because it's not my bailiwick, except that I share that concern because I think everybody in the state shares the concern. It's just a question of how to address it. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Perkins-Coker, did you have a statement? We're talking with, we're in exec, so you have any comments?
I was just wondering if, I forgot, if the Department of Energy took a position on this bill. Sorry to get you out of your chair.
You
guys picked the best bill for me to come back on. In any case, yes, the Department of Energy, I'm sorry, for the record, Griffin Roberge, New Hampshire Department of Energy. For the record, the department was in opposition to this bill during the public hearing.
And how is it towards the amendment?
I have not seen the amendment.
You have not seen
The
it.
department has not seen the
Okay.
amendment.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much. And we're going to give you a copy. So any further discussion on this? I think what we're going to do is we're going to take this up again tomorrow.
All right, good.
And we'll move on. I don't have Senator Gaida. He's actually, for the record, Senator Gaida is excused because he's actually working as a town moderator, I think it is, or during the
Yeah,
polls.
right, that's right.
So
I remember you said that, yeah.
He couldn't make it today, and I would really like him here on this exec session that
Yeah, good. Yeah.
we'll have tomorrow. Hopefully, everybody will be here tomorrow. Do I?
Yeah.
Senator Gray?
If Shannon says I can,
Okay. Well, we have a lot of bills, and unless you want to take up another one, I would like to just reserve the time
Sounds good.
to review most of the bills for tomorrow, seeing how we're going to be execing. And I don't have Senator Gaida here, but at least if he'll be here tomorrow, that'll work out best for all of us. Yes.
Clarify on 341, I got Daly's email. We need to exec that again because it was 2-2, or it's
Yeah.
all set?
So it said, whatever, I don't know.
Okay.
We can exec that again tomorrow. We'll
Okay.
exec it tomorrow.
But I thought we bring things to the floor too.
That's what was my understanding too, so I don't know what the
We do.
hang-up is.
So just because we haven't amended with it, we can't like recommend something that's 2-2 with an amendment.
Oh, okay,
I
that's,
talked to Sonia about it and they
Right.
recommended it and Grant as well.
Okay.
all right, thank you, that clarifies it.
Yeah, so, Senator Gray.
So what I just heard was that the bill can go forward and the amendment can be placed as a floor amended and brought up after we get a little further down the stream without us taking any action.
I think
That was my
that is
understanding
the way
too,
we
but
could do it, so.
we'll take it up, we can take it up tomorrow if necessary. It's not gonna kill us.
I still have the notes.
Yeah.
from the committee and changes and everything.
All
Okay.
right. So
Whatever,
what we'll do is
whatever.
we'll exec a number of bills tomorrow, so if you want to just go through your folders. I would like Senator Gaida here, and I know
Yeah.
that he can't be here,
So, Senator,
Yeah.
I have a meeting at 3, which I could change if we need to, but you think we'll be done by 3 tomorrow?
I have to,
Okay,
I gotta
good,
be
all right,
out of
good,
here.
so that, I'm good for that.
Yeah.
Great.
Good, thank
So
you.
I'll probably give it an hour and a half tomorrow because I
Right.
have to flee.
Good.
But I would like to exec as many as possible.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, and so with that, is there a motion to move out of exec?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, seeing none, thank you. Appreciate everybody. All right. Thank you very much. I was looking for the blue in it, but you got blue. Okay.
That's the best I can do.
My heart goes out to them. Believe me, I've been praying for them quite a bit, actually.
It's really, really something.
Yeah, we got some stuff going today. Oh, I have to be the youngest lawyer.
I mean, it's a good question, I don't know. What do I know? I'm not a lawyer.
But Senator Gaida is excused. Just make sure that's in the notes. That Senator Gaida is excused.
Yeah, we were in exec session, so.
No, but I want.
Something like that. Yep. No, I understand. So feel free to shoot me emails to, well, yeah, let me know, show you my phone, because I'll likely be coming here tomorrow, but I'd rather you keep talking with people. David, she wants the legal.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to give you a heads up, and I would have said the same thing to Amanda.
Yeah, I'll pass that along to Amanda when I get back.
And my hope is that,